Okay, I think we're ready to go. 8 o'clock. It's a good time to start. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I'm excited to learn a Parsha that may not seem so exciting from the outset. As we said, we're in those Parshiot in the Torah where there's so much detail, measurements, construction, how to build things, and the storyline is a little bit schwach. As I said in my drush on Shabbos, nobody is going to be making a movie out of this Parsha. There may be other parts of the Torah that they will be, but nobody is going to be making a movie out of this Parsha. I just want to make sure that everybody is muted. We'll have a chance to schmooze after the Shiur is over. Let me do that. Okay. Before we begin, I do want to acknowledge the sponsorship of our Shiur this evening. Thank you very much to my good friend Helen Brown and her family, who are sponsoring the Shiur tonight in memory of Helen's late father, Sam Siegel, Zichrono Livracha, Yeshua ben Yaakov Levi. May his neshama have an aliyah, and Helen, may you and your whole family be blessed with long life and good health. So it's been a busy week. Haven't heard all the good news that we're all hoping for from Israel, but that doesn't mean this coming week may not, maybe this coming week will be the week. And as I said at the beginning, may the zchut of our learning Torah together, all of us together, no matter where we're sitting, which city we're sitting in, or whatever room we're sitting in, may that learning bring merit for those who need merit, for those who are ill, physically, spiritually, emotionally, psychologically. May it be a merit to bring all the hostages home. May it be a merit to bring peace to everybody in Israel. May it be a merit for the Jewish people. God knows we're all sort of feeling a little bit outnumbered, and we all need Yeshua. So may that be, may what we're doing tonight be helpful and maybe tipping that balance. So tonight's Parsha is Parsha Tetzaveh. It's the second of a series of 4.5 parashot that deal exclusively with the laws of the construction of this temporary sanctuary called the Mishkan in Israel. It's temporary, but it was always intended to be temporary, because once the Jewish people enter the land of Israel, there's a positive commandment for them to build a temple, which of course becomes Beit HaMikdash. Interestingly enough, at no point in God's discussions about building of the temple is it ever indicated what city it should be built in. It's always referred to as the place that Hashem will choose and show you. It doesn't say in Yerushalayim. An interesting fact, but that's maybe for another Shiur. But tonight's Shiur is going to focus on Parsha Tetzaveh. And the beginning of part of the Shiur, I want to actually take a look at the very first pasuk from a whole bunch of different angles. And keeping in mind the following: just like you and I are reading this parasha, so did our forefathers and our rabbis and commentaries throughout the ages. And every one of them, at least from the traditional perspective that I'm sharing with you as I teach Torah, every one of them had at the back of their mind the same question. And the question is, how do I make sense of this verse or these verses? Because each of them lived at a time that's well beyond the time of the sanctuary in the desert, the Mishkan. So if the Torah is insisting on dedicating 4.5 full parashot to tell me about these instructions, then there must be some meaning that's beyond history, that's beyond that 40-year period. How are a group of people living in 2024, no matter where you are, what are you supposed to do with this parsha? How are you supposed to apply it? Because the Torah is eternal. It's not a book of history, and it's not a book of the past. It's a book of the present, and it's a book for the future. So what is the present in this story, or in this verse, or in this parasha, or in this law? And so starting with that, let's take a look at the very beginning of Parsha Tetzaveh. You don't have to use a Chumash. If you want to use a Chumash, then open up the Sefer Shemot. We are in chapter 27 in Sefer Shemot, the book of Exodus, and it's going to be chapter 27, verse 20. So 27, verse 20. Okay. So want to read it, and we're going to spend some time taking a look at a lot of different ideas and what seems to be a rather, clear pasuk. So here's how it starts. First Hebrew language. Ve'ata titzaveh et bnei Yisrael v'ikchu elecha shemen zayit zach katit lamaor leha'alot ner tamid. Now you shall command the children of Israel that they shall take for you clear olive oil, crushed for illumination, to kindle a lamp continually. So again, employing the traditional rabbinic lens by which we are studying Torah, this verse is filled with so many different points of interest that the traditional rabbis, starting from the time of the Gemara and way beyond that to the 21st century, stop and pause and try to understand so many parts of it. So I'm going to start. The first explanation I want to share with you tonight is that of Rav Moshe ben Nachman Nachmanides. And so let's read this verse again. This time I'm going to sort of try and give you the background to Nachmanides' response. When he looked at this verse, what did he see? So much of understanding biblical commentary, as I've tried to explain in the past, is playing a game. And the modern game of Jeopardy. And maybe some of you watch it on TV. So Jeopardy is a game by which the contestants are shown an answer to a question. And their job is to ask the question. So a lot of the commentaries write their commentaries in that format. They give you an answer to a question they ask themselves, but don't necessarily explicitly include in their commentary. So you have an answer, and you say, well, what's this an answer to? What was on the mind of the author? What part of the verse troubled him? Why did he write this? So let's take a look again at the beginning part of this verse. Ve'ata titzaveh et bnei Yisrael, and you shall now you shall command the children of Israel. Okay, so this is how Parsha Titzaveh begins. What makes this unusual is that for so many verses and chapters that precede Parsha Titzaveh, the Torah has told us many times of how Hashem told Moshe, I want you to teach this content to the Jewish people. But at no point in Hashem giving these instructions to Moshe, at no point does God use the language, Ve'ata titzaveh, you shall command. There are other structures. Vayomer Hashem Moshe, Daber el bnei Yisrael, Hashem said to Moshe, speak to the Jewish people, or Tzav, command the Jewish people. But Ata titzaveh means you in the future will command. Now, when I say you in the future, I want to be very clear. I'm using that as a grammatical term. There's past tense, there's present tense, and there's future tense. But in Hebrew, there's one more tense, which is the imperative. It's the command. The Ata titzaveh is not the command. That's future tense. If it was command, it would be Tzav et bnei Yisrael. So even though Ata titzaveh is in the future, as is the tense, command tense in the future, why does Hashem use the future tense and not the command tense? If at the end of it all, the intention is for Moshe to command them. And we already have a pre-existing style in which the Torah is written, or the way Hashem speaks to Moshe. So that question alone is enough to sort of prompt some explanation. But that's not entirely enough for Rav Moshe ben Nachman, who looks at this verse, and he says, well, actually, there's more than that question. So I'm going to read the Ramban to you. It's a very short Ramban, but let's understand how he understood this verse. Amar hakatuv v'kan, and the Torah states here, in this point, ve'ata titzaveh, and you shall command, va'avur sha'amar b'mishkan tamid v'asita v'hu b'tzivui. And the Ramban says, how odd? Because in the entire Parsha that preceded Parsha Truma, over and over and over again, the Torah records how God commanded Moshe about all the construction necessary of the Mishkan and its vessels. And each and every time the Torah used the language, it said to Moshe, Moshe, ve'asita, and you shall make. Now, ve'asita, and you shall make, or construct. Now, we all know that God was not commanding Moshe to physically, personally take all the tools and build a Mishkan by himself. Rather, what the Torah was saying is, Moshe, you're going to be the chief in charge of this. You're the project manager. I don't expect you to do it, but I expect you to take control of it and pick all the people you need to do the project, and you're managing it. But the manager gets credit, as it were, for the whole enterprise. So while I don't expect you to actually carry out every single hammer banging and smashing and building, and I expect you to take care that it gets all done. You're accountable. So if in the previous Parsha, where there's so many instructions, and the Torah uses the word ba'asita, and you shall make, speaking to Moshe, why doesn't this Parsha begin the same way? Why does it change and says ve'ata titzaveh? So Ramban is wondering why the change of style, why the change of tense, why the change of words. That's how carefully he and other Meforshim will learn the Torah. So I want you to listen to how he answers this. Amar bekan, so the Torah did that on purpose. Why? Ve'ata be'atzmecha titzaveh lahem. I want you, Moshe, you. Don't appoint anybody. I want you to be the one to pass this information on. You got to be the one. You're held accountable and responsible, meaning accountability is the notion of who's in charge, and responsible means who can I delegate it to that has to do the job. I'm accountable. You're going to come back to my desk. The buck stops here. But in my performing what I have to do, I can delegate. And Hashem says, no, I don't want you to delegate this. This is not delegatable. You're going to be going around and telling everybody. Shikhu elecha shemen hamor. And I want you to be very clear. I want you to tell everybody that they have to come to you, elecha, to you, with the oil. Whoa. Yeah, I want them to come to you with the oil. You go, you tell them that they have to make the oil, and then when they make it, they got to come back to you personally. Ki ein lahem derech lasot oto b'midbar, rak im haya etzlam mishmeret. Now listen to this. This is a real interesting point. So Ramban reads this very carefully. You tell them personally, directly. V'yikhu elecha. What do those two words mean in Hebrew? That they shall take for you. What should they take for you? Pure oil. Okay. They shall take for you. Now, if you were writing this verse, what verb should we be using here? Take for you? Probably it should be make for you. Making oil. Taking oil is a different sort of context. Well, listen to what the Ramban said. And it makes such sense. Where did the Jews spend 40 years? Well, you know the answer to that. In the desert. Well, how many olive orchards are in the desert? None. There's no olive orchards. There's no olive trees. So how is it possible to impose an obligation on a generation of Jews in the desert where there's no olive trees? And the obligation is to make olive oil. So that's not possible. It's not realistic. And so the Ramban says, indeed, it's not. So where did the olive oil come from? Listen to what he says. Ki ein lahem derech lasot oto b'midbar. There's no way of making olive oil in the desert. So what? Rak im haya etzlam mishmer. The only way there could be oil to light the menorah while they were in the desert for 40 years is if they brought oil with them when they left Egypt. So if they brought oil with them when they left Egypt, then what word should Moshe have used when asking for the oil? Yeah, take it. Take it from whatever storage cans you have, because they're not making it. That's why the Torah didn't use the word make. it used the word to take it, because, as according to the Rambam, they couldn't possibly make it. V'hanesiim hevi'uhu, and from other sources that we see later in the Chumash, who brought the oil? It was the princes, the Nesiim of the tribes. So the Ramban is reading this verse so carefully, and he's saying something. Says, Hashem says, I want you personally to tell them that they have to bring the oil to you. The oil, which oil? The oil that was brought from Egypt, Mitzrayim. And then, Shiuva lefanav v'hu yir'enu. And the oil had to be brought to Moshe, and Moshe has to see. Moshe has to check personally. Im zach v'chatit karoi. If the oil was as pure as it needed to be used for lighting the menorah in the Mishkan. And therefore, the Ramban concludes, and that's why it says these words. So let me just stop for a second. And let's think this through just a little bit more. So what this means, according to the Ramban, is an interesting historical fact that they must have taken the oil with them. So I don't know, I'm not a mathematician, but one of the implications of the Ramban's theory, if he's right, is how much oil would they have to have brought to actually fuel the menorah for every day of 40 years in the desert? That's a lot of oil. So the Ramban, while he may be solving a textual problem of why these words are written, may in fact be honest and loyal to the text, but may be creating a sort of context that may not seem so reasonable. And so it's not surprising that some of the commentaries trying to understand the Ramban have to figure out, wait a second, there's no way they could have brought that much oil. That's not even possible. So how do you work around that? And others suggest, well, maybe they weren't using all of the oil each night. Maybe they didn't really need that much oil, depending on how much was required. And there is a sliding scale of opinion of how much oil was necessary. But here's a really interesting fact. According to this verse, who had to check the oil? It seems like one person, Moshe Rabbeinu. But there is a single midrash in all of rabbinic literature, which says that it had to be checked, correct, either by Moshe or his brother, the Kohen Gadol. It's the only source that says that. All the other sources seem to say, let's read the verse as it is. There's a work on the Chumash called Torah Shalema by Rabbi Menachem Kasher. Rabbi Menachem Kasher died in the year 1983. He was born in Europe. Tremendous Talmid Chacham, tremendous. And one of the greatest achievements in his life was he went through the Chumash, verse by verse, word by word, and identified various manuscripts and key midrashim on it, and then followed it up with scholarly interpretations and essays onto where the difficulties lie. And he said something so fascinating that may explain something in a holiday we all celebrate. So let me just remind you, Rabbi Kasher said there is one midrash that he's found, only one source, that says that while it said in this pasuk that the oil had to be brought to Moshe for checking, there is a single midrash that says that the oil had to be brought to Moshe or to the Kohen Gadol. Okay, let's just stop for a second. There's a holiday in which oil plays a key part, and the holiday is Hanukkah. Everybody got that. And we all know the story. What's the story? The story is that when the Chashmonaim finally defeated the Greeks and made their way into the temple, the Beit Mikdash, and cleaned it up, they wanted to relight the menorah. Do you remember? And the Gemara tells the story, and every little kid in school knows the story. What was the story? They were looking for pure oil to light it, and they could not find a canister of oil that had what? That had the seal of the Kohen Gadol. Remember that part of the story? Here's the thing. Nowhere in the Gemara does it ever discuss that the oil to use to light the menorah had to have the seal of the Kohen Gadol. It doesn't mention it. It doesn't mention it anywhere, in any context, whether it's Hanukkah context or the Korbanot context. It's not mentioned. The only source that mentions the Kohen Gadol needing to check the oil is that one midrash on this pasuk. And Rabbi Kasher says that may be the source for the whole Hanukkah story, where they were looking for the oil with the canister with a closed seal of the Kohen Gadol. Because outside of that one midrash, there is no other rabbinic source that establishes that that's a halacha that had to be managed. Okay, so that's our opening piece on this story. But there's so much more in this pasuk that I want to share with you right now. Parsha Tetzaveh is always read this time of the year. And so when I say this time of the year, I don't mean February. I'm talking about the Hebrew calendar. It's always read the week of 7th of Adar. And why is the 7th of Adar a significant date on the Jewish calendar? You probably all know, because the 7th of Adar, Zayin Adar, is considered to be the Yortzeit of Moshe Rabbeinu. So although if you take a look at the Chumash, especially at the last few verses which record Moshe's death, the date of his death is not recorded in the Chumash. So how would I know that it's Zayin Adar? Well, what I know is this. Well, I know that in the book of Joshua, which is the next book in the Tanakh, we know when the Jewish people crossed over the Jordan, following the 30 days of mourning that the Torah tells us the Jewish people mourn for Moshe Rabbeinu. So following the date that they crossed over, working back 30 days, we figure out he must have died on the Zayin Adar. In addition to which, the rabbis tell us that one of the signs of a tzaddik is that not only do they die, that their birthday and their yurtzeit are the same. They're born and they die on the same day. So Moshe Rabbeinu died on Zayin Adar, and it's believed that his birthday was Zayin. Okay. This parsha is read on the week in which Moshe's yurtzeit and birthday fall. Okay, that's very nice. But there's something else about Parsha Tetzaveh that's worthy of noting, and that is that when you read through this entire parsha, you'll notice his name is not mentioned. So obviously his name isn't mentioned in the book of Breshit, we got that. But starting from his birth in Sefer Shemot to the end of Sefer Dvarim when he dies, he's mentioned in every parsha. In this parsha, he's not mentioned. One of the reasons he's not mentioned, which is the traditional explanation, actually is an explanation of a story that's not yet recorded. It's going to be recorded in next week's parsha of Ki Tisa. And in Ki Tisa, Perek Lamed Beit, Torah is going to tell us about the famous story of the Egel Hazahav, the golden calf. And you all know that following the golden calf, God's anger was roused to the point that he was prepared to destroy the Jewish people. The rabbis sort of give us a description if you want to understand the nature of God's rage in quotation marks, because God is not subject to the same human emotions that we have. But to understand God's reaction is to imagine a chuppah and imagine a chatan and kala standing under the chuppah, and the rabbi is doing what he's doing in the brachot. And as the ceremony is unfolding, the bride turns around and starts kissing another guy under the chuppah. That sort of violation and that sort of betrayal is so visceral and so unacceptable. God says, that's what I feel happened. I was there. I gave you the aseret that you brought. I thought that we were standing on a chuppah together. I thought we were betrothed to each other. And here, right there, under this chuppah, you decide to build a golden calf. That level of betrayal is God's feeling. And it was so deep and so transformative that God said, I want to start again. I had enough. I had enough. Moshe, I'll start with you. Moshe understood his responsibility as the advocate for the Jewish people. And he says, that's not a good answer. I'm not going to let you do that. If you're not going to be accepting my prayers, if you're not going to forgive them, mecheni na misiftacha, then wipe me out of your book. I don't want you to mention my name. I don't want you to mention my name. And so, his name is not mentioned in this week's Parsha. Now, I know that you're going to say, well, wait a second, if it's not in this week's Parsha, but it's the story happens in next week's Parsha, we have the wrong chronology? Good question. One quick answer is to remind everybody that the Torah is not a history book. So it's not bound to follow a certain chronology. Sometimes the chronology in the Torah, certainly according to Rashi, and that school of thought that Rashi subscribed to, is that for whatever reason, the Torah chose not to do things in chronological order because it wanted to highlight certain ideas, events, messages, and so sometimes things are out of order. But be that as it may, that's not the point of the Torah, this piece now. So Moshe's name is not written here. Rabbi Zalman Sorotskin, great Talmud Chacham, survivor of the Holocaust, wrote a paper to the Torah called Oznaim LaTorah. He died in the 1980s as well. And in his commentary to the Chumash on this piece, Rabbi Sorotskin wants us to understand the significance of Moshe Rabbeinu's, the absence of his name from this Parsha. It's not simply as a response to Mecheni Na Masifta, where God says, okay, if you want me not to put your name there, then it won't be there. He says you have to understand that righteous people bring with them a certain level of impact on the world. Impact not only because people recognize their righteousness, but impact on the world because their righteousness is so pervasive that the things that they say matter. And when a righteous person says something that even as it were God wants to preserve that righteousness and respond to it and support it and encourage it and recognize it in the eyes of everybody else, as well as in the eyes of the tzaddik, as a form of a reward. And so when God heard Moshe say these words, he honored his words, not as a punishment to Moshe, but in some ways as an act of respect. If that is something you're actually asking me to do, I will remove your name. Now, herein lies, according to Rabbi Sorotskin, a theological response to some of the other world religions, meaning this. Judaism is unique in world religions because, unlike the other religions, we don't place stock in a word of a single prophet. We don't become Jewish and follow the Torah because a single prophet told us so. We don't have a revelation that came from God to one man who then broadcasted to an entire nation, who then somehow said, okay, whatever you tell us, we'll do. Of course, we know that the Aseret HaDibrot were stated publicly in front of 2 or 3 million people. Moshe was there, but he wasn't the only one. So the veracity and the truthfulness of revelation lies not in Moshe Rabbeinu's greatness as a prophet. It lies in the fact that everybody participated. And at the end of the Decalogue, at the end of God's revelation, everybody went home and said, did you hear that? Oh my God. They all shared the same experience. And when everybody shares the same experience, it's not faith based on what one guy tells you. It's faith based on what you yourself saw, experienced, and felt. And so, according to Rabbi Sorotskin, it's important to recognize that we don't follow the Torah because of Moshe Rabbeinu. And even if you were to say, if there's ever going to be a week that we're going to celebrate the greatest prophet that ever lived, if there's going to be a week that we're going to celebrate the most humble and servant that God ever produced on the face of this planet, if there's ever going to be a week where we're going to celebrate the teacher that brought Torah to us and who made sure that we understood every pasuk, every message, every halacha, the week to celebrate it is in the week of his birthday and the week of his yurtzeit. The week of Zayin Adar. This is the Parsha. This is the week that we ought to celebrate Moshe Rabbeinu. And on the week where we ought to celebrate Moshe Rabbeinu's impact, the legacy that Moshe Rabbeinu gave to the Jewish people, here we are, 2024. We would not be standing here having a Parsha Shiur if we're not for Moshe Rabbeinu. So the fact that we're having a Shiur in some ways is in fact a celebration of his legacy. But the Torah says, but we're not going to mention his name. In the week of his Yurtzeit, we will not mention his name. And Rabbi Sorotskin says, and in so doing, it's not out of disrespect for Moshe. On the contrary, it's rather an affirmation of the uniqueness of the Jewish religion and faith compared to other world religions. So whether it be Christianity or whether it be Islam, who have central prophets who then shared their vision of their religious belief with the people, not so Judaism. And so this week's Parsha, in the absence of Moshe's name, has a fairly significant theological message, which is Judaism never relied on the prophecy and leadership of Moshe Rabbi. He played an incredible role, but it wasn't the role of bringing it and being the cause of it. In fact, one other key ritual that we all observe on a yearly basis is the Pesach Seder, right? And so you can read all the parashot in the Torah, and clearly in the Torah itself, Moshe's name is repeated over and over and over again as a critical part of the unfolding of the redemption. It's clear, but it's there's no mention of Moshe at the Seder. There's once, that's it. He doesn't play a role in the Haggadah. You would think that the Haggadah was going to somehow weave Moshe's role. It's not. We even the Aseret Hamakot, Dam, Tzvardei, Yakinim, when we dip the wine, we do all those things. His name isn't even mentioned. Again, is another reminder that notwithstanding his central role in the history of the Jewish people and in making sure that he taught the Torah to the Jewish people so that in the year 2024 we have something to discuss, he plays virtually no role to make sure that we know where the central faith needs to be placed, and that is in the religion and in God and not in the human beings. Okay, still talking about the first pasuk. Well, in that case, I was really talking more about the whole parsha. So let's go on back to the first pasuk. So we mentioned in my first part of Torah that according to the first pasuk, the mitzvah is to produce something called shemen zayit. Now, according to the Ramban, there was no production in the desert. There couldn't be because there was no olive orchard. Now, it's interesting that other Meforshim don't seem to be bothered by that. I don't know what the word is. Agricultural challenge. Maybe, in fact, the Ramban is not 100% true. Maybe in the 40-year desert, 40-year sojourn in the desert, they stopped at oases, and it's possible. I remember when I was studying in yeshiva in Israel, one of the most amazing trips I ever took in my life was in the Sinai Desert. This was before Israel had returned the Sinai Desert as a result of the peace treaty with Egypt. Israel was still in charge of the Sinai Desert, and so our yeshiva took us on a tour of the Sinai Desert, which was extraordinary. And one of the places we visited, I remember this quite clearly, was a place called Tel Firan, which was an oasis. And we're driving in this truck, no air conditioning. And we're driving, and it looks like a desert, 100%. It looks like a desert, sand and sand and sand and sand. You don't see anything else except sun and sand. And then I remember we were driving and there was like one bush. And then we drove another 20 minutes and then another bush, another 10 minutes and more bushes. And as we're getting closer to, I didn't know what we're getting closer to, you can see there's more and more greenery. And then we finally reached this oasis of Tel Firan in the middle of a desert. And it's extraordinary. It's date palm trees, and there's water, and it's lush, and there's a community of like living in this space. And so it might be possible, contrary to what the Ramban says, that maybe there was some sort of olive oil production. Not that the Israelites planted the olives and stayed there long enough. They did stay, by the way, Rashi tells us of their sojourn in the desert, just for everybody's clarity, there was one place that's named called Kadesh. And I don't know if anybody knows how long did they stay in Kadesh, and the answer is 19 years. So they actually were camped in the place called Kadesh for 19 years. So maybe in Kadesh, it was possible to make olive oil. because for 19 years and having water, perhaps they could have even started it and finished it. Possible, contrary to what the Ramban says. But be that as it may, let's just take a look again at this idea of shemen. So according to the Torah's instruction, they had to bring olive oil for lighting the menorah in the Mishkan, shemen zayit zach katit, especially pure olive oil. Now, the Mishnah Masechet Menachot on page 86a describes the procedure for extracting oil from olives. And in that Mishnah, the Mishnah notes that the clearest oil was used for the kindling, for the lighting of the menorah. And the rest of the oil, which wasn't as pure, it wasn't as clean, was used for other purposes, specifically the menachot. The menachot were the meal offerings which contained oil. So they made oil. The first few drops, which were the cleanest drops, went to light the menorah, and the rest of the oil, of which there was a greater quantity, was used for the korban mincha. Now, the Mishnah comments that maybe we would have assumed that the menachot, part of which was offered on the altar, the menachot that were put on the mizbeach, would require especially high quality oil. But since the Torah specified that the quality of the oil for the menorah had to be so special, and it doesn't say that by the menachot, it just says by the menorah, then we believe, says the Gemara, that lower quality is acceptable for the menachot. You might have thought that because it's going in the mizbeach is a holy, the holy altar that burns. It's a sign of giving God a gift. We don't want to bring God anything less than the best. But since the best type of oil is mentioned only by the menorah, the Gemara concludes that it's implied that a lower quality could be brought for the mincha. So the Gemara, which comments on the Mishnah, explains that the reason behind this halakha, that you didn't have to bring the best quality oil for the mincha, the reason for that is the following rule. HaTorah chasa al mamonam shel Yisrael, which means the Torah is sensitive to the Jewish people's limited financial resources. Chasa al mamonam shel Yisrael. The Torah is sensitive to the financial resources of the Jewish people, which means that requiring the finest olive oil was very costly. It really was. In order to get a larger quantity of olive oil, you needed a huge amount of olives, because only a few drops of each olive could be used. So if only a few drops of olive oil can be used, then let's save it for the menorah that only used a smaller quantity of oil. But the menachot, of which many, many were brought during the course of the day, can use a lower quality. And so if you can use a lower quality, it's a way of the Torah expressing its sensitivity to an acknowledgement that bringing a korban also required monetary ability on the part of the owner of the korban. You have to buy the material. So even if it was flour and oil, which was what a mincha was essentially, it cost. So if you're going to tell a person bringing a korban, no, you got to bring the best oil, and you have to bring, and there are a lot of menachot, that means a huge quantity of oil, and the most expensive oils will be going for the menachot. Rabbi Yehuda Ginsburg, whose opinions I often quote, had an interesting symbolic explanation of why the Torah distinguished between the type of oil necessary for the menorah, the light, and a lesser quality which was acceptable for the meal offering that was brought on the altar. And Rabbi Ginsburg suggests the following, that light, which is what the menorah produced, light in general is a symbol. And in many literatures, but certainly within rabbinic literature, Jewish literature, the light and the menorah are associated with wisdom. Wisdom, light, and in fact, even in English, what an enlightened idea, meaning that light represents the notion of thoughtfulness, intellectualism, thinking things through. That's what light represents, wisdom. But mincha It's a korban that was eaten by the Kohanim. It's a korban brought to God, but some korbanot were allowed to be shared with the Kohanim, who used them for their livelihood, theirs and their family's livelihood, and whatever they needed. So whereas menorah represents wisdom and enlightenment and thought and intellectual thinking, the mincha represents something a little bit more material, eating, material wealth, material sustenance. And so therefore, says Rabbi Ginsburg, it's significant that the Torah chassa al mamonam shel Yisrael is applied to the mincha offering, but not to the menorah. It's not applied to the menorah. So underlying this halacha, says Rabbi Ginsburg, is the message of prioritization, financial prioritization. And in a way, this halacha is urging us to give priority to some extent to our spiritual endeavors over our material pursuits, something that we're not always accustomed to. In our world, and not just the Jewish world, in the world in which we live globally, it's very often the material pursuits which are seen to be more material, more significant, more primary, and the spiritual pursuits are seen to be entirely secondary. But by insisting that the finest measure of oil be given to the menorah and the less finer be given to the mincha, the Torah is making a very strong statement that we all have limited resources. Most of us do, at least. Most of the people in the world are average and maybe a little bit below average, maybe a little bit above average, but we all struggle. We all have our limits. So we should exercise fiscal discipline in the area of menachot. When it comes to that part of our lives, material part of our lives, a little bit of restraint is called for. In fact, the Torah said that. When it came to it's our own culture and own ritual of bringing korbanot, restraint made sense. And so therefore, a lower quality oil was okay. But the high quality oil, make sure that that is in fact given its proper due when it comes to the spiritual. And I think everybody can somehow figure out what sort of modern day application that theory applies to. Here's a real question at a real ethical level, and it's a communal question. So I don't know how many of you out there have yourselves had the opportunity for Jewish education in Jewish school, or maybe your children or your grandchildren. So I'm going to call Jewish education and the costs related to it menorah-like costs. Okay? There's a cost to teaching your children. There is. Maybe it's higher than it needs to be, for sure, but it is a cost. And so now if you have X amount of dollars, and you know that some of it has to go to pay for your kids' tuition, but you're going to decide to use that X amount of dollars to go on a fancy vacation, buy a second car, and then we can make the list longer and longer. It's an ethical question. It's an ethical question. And I'm not saying how you should solve it for every family, but it is a moment of ethical consideration because we need to pay for the teachers. They also have families. And we need to make sure the school can function because there are costs. And so if I have extra money, where should I put it? So it may not seem that was what the Torah was talking about between menorah and mincha, but in some ways, I think that's precisely what Rabbi Ginsburg wants us to think about. Where do we draw our financial priority? It's a thought, not a simple one. Definitely not a simple one. Okay.
A heartbeat.
Okay, I'm going to skip a little bit because I want to do two more divrei Torah. I'm going to skip to chapter 29. We spent a lot of time, almost 45 minutes on the very first part. So I'm skipping to chapter 29. And we're going to be going to Pasuk 38 to 42. So if you want to look through that, you can find that. And it has to do with the various clothing that the Kohanim had to wear. One of the topics that Parsha Tetzaveh deals with is the clothing that the priests had to wear while doing service in the temple. It was a critical part of the service. They needed to be clothed specifically in a certain way with certain garments. Their clothes were not upon them. Whatever ritual service they performed was considered invalid. They need to be dressed in the garments that the Torah says were the garments for them during that service. Okay, so the Torah has the following. So in these discussions, the Torah discusses the Mishkan's construction by talking about the special garments that the Kohanim have to do, and proceeding to the and as well as the topic of how the Kohanim were to be formally inducted into their priesthood. That was a service that was called the Miluim. And right after that was the command about the Korban Tamid. So I have this notion of clothing, induction, and the Korban Tamid. Tamid literally means always. It was the daily sacrifice that was brought in the morning and also in the afternoon. Korban Tamid shel boker and Korban Tamid shel bein harba'im. So these three topics come to juxtapose one next to the other. And so Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, living in Germany in the 1800s, fought very, very vociferously against the reform movement that had taken hold in Germany and became a great defender of orthodoxy, which was seen to be superstition, just a collection of superstitious ideas, because at that point Germany was considered to be a center of enlightenment, and faith and religion was seen to be, in fact, diametrically opposed to reason and intellect. Religion was seen to be superstition. So Hirsch took a position that he felt that he needed to defend the religion and explain it in a way that highlighted its reason and its intellect. So a lot of his writings, in fact, spend a lot of time demonstrating to the reader why this religion made as much sense as it does. But I'm going to read a section to you, and he explains why the mitzvah, the command of the daily sacrifice, follows the command of the building of the Mishkan and the assignments of the Kohanim and their induction. This is the English translation. By the way, he wrote in German, and everything you see that's published by Rabbi Hirsch is in fact the result of translation. It is not the establishment and consecration of sanctuary and priests that by itself brings about the promised goal of God's presence in the nation. This goal is only achieved by the priests expressing ever afresh on behalf of the nation the daily devotion of the lives of the people to the ideals of Judaism, as represented by the sanctuary. This and only this makes the Mikdash the place of the divine presence, the Shekhinah. The establishment of the temple does not achieve this object once for always, but only provides the possibility for it. It is only achieved when the sanctuary becomes alive and active through the acts of devotion of the people, which is to be equivalent to the heartbeat, the central driving force of the national life. This constant devotion of the people to the ideals of the divine Torah, to which the sanctuary was built, which is the necessary condition for the purpose of the sanctuary, is the meaning of the Tamid offering. So what Rabbi Hirsch is saying, I believe, is don't think that the building is holy. The building is not holy because it's built. The building is holy because of what the people do in the building on a regular basis. It's the priests who bring the action, the activity. It's the priests who bring their devotion into the building. If they never walked into the building, then the building would just be empty, and it would not have the sanctity that it was intended to have. So in other words, what Rabbi Hirsch is saying is, what makes the space holy is the people that come into it. And I guess in a modern version of this is, so what makes your shul holy? And if you're going to say, oh, because there's a Sefer Torah hidden in the Aron Kodesh, that makes the shul holy. Well, of course the Sefer Torah is holy. But if the Sefer Torah is hidden behind the Aron Kodesh, and day after day after day, there's no minyan in the building, then what are you going to say about the building? Is it holy? Well, not so, the Hirsch is telling us. What makes something holy, what makes something have a beating heartbeat and make it the center of Jewish life is the fact that people are using it. And so we're calling out, I think, years after this Mishkan was built, and Hirsch is reaching out to us and saying, what do you think the shul is for? What makes the shul what it is? If we don't use the shul and come into it, we just transformed it into an empty edifice. And empty edifices really don't play such a big role in our lives. And so I think what he's calling out to us and saying, think about what we do to make the shul an active place. And if you want the shul to be an active place for your grandchildren, then you better be active in it yourself, because they know if they don't see it as an active place, the message is it just doesn't matter. And so that again, I think, is a side message that Hirsch is trying to tell us, is that the Mishkan, in order to be the Mishkan it was intended to be, had to be tamid. There had to be things happening in it on a regular basis. I want to end the shiur tonight with going back to the first verse, but I have to share this short essay. I've often quoted and mentioned the beauty of this book, Judaism's Life-Changing Ideas, by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. And I found the essay that he wrote on this particular Parsha to be very touching. Touching because his writing is always powerful, his messages are always meaningful, but it's particularly touching because of the place that we're in, Jews worldwide, and especially our brothers and sisters living in Israel. The title of the essay that he wrote, and they're all very short, there's really nothing long here. It's called Crushed for the Light. Crushed for the Light. And hopefully just the title itself is an image. What is he talking about? Well, what is crushed? The olives were crushed. They were crushed to produce the olive oil that was then used to light the menorah. So crushed for the light. And I wish I could read all of this to you, but I'm not going to. He begins the first part of this essay by mentioning a couple that he knew, Henry and Renata, man and a wife, husband and wife, who were deeply in love with each other and really, really loved everything about Judaism. He and his wife, Renata, were a model couple, active in synagogue life, always inviting guests to their home for Shabbat or the festivals. I came to know Henry because he believed in giving back to the community, not only in money, but also in time and energy and leadership. He became the chairperson of many Jewish organizations, including the National Israel Field, British Friends of Bar Ilan University, the Jewish Marriage Council, the British Israel Chamber of Commerce, and the Western Marble Arts Synagogue. He loved learning and teaching Torah. So I think you're hearing how this man was indeed so very special. Then 7 years ago, he came back from morning service in the synagogue to find that Renata, his wife, had suffered a devastating stroke. For a while, her life hung in the balance. She survived, but their whole life now had to change. They gave up their magnificent apartment in the center of town for a place with easier wheelchair access. Henry became Renata's constant career and life support. He was with her day and night, attentive to her every need. I'm going to skip a little bit. Then, a year ago, he was diagnosed with an inoperable condition. He had, and knew he had, only a short time to live. What he did then was a supreme act of will. He sought one thing, to be given the grace to live as long as Renata did, so that she would never find herself alone. 3 months ago, as I write these words, Renata died. Shortly thereafter, Henry joined her. Beloved and pleasant in their lives, and in their death undivided. Rarely have I seen such love in adversity. So that's a very moving story. That's a very moving story. And now Rabbi Sachs transitions to the Parsha. Our Parsha begins with the word, command the Israelites to bring you clear olive oil, crushed for the light, katit lamaor, so that the lamp may always burn. The sages drew a comparison between the olive and the Jewish people. And here Rabbi Sachs quotes a midrash. Everything's in translation. I'll read the translation that he writes. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi asked, why is Israel compared to an olive? Just as an olive is first bitter, then sweet, so Israel suffers in the present, but great good is stored up for them in the time to come. And just as the olive only yields its oil by being crushed, as it is written, clear olive oil crushed for the light, so Israel fulfills the Torah only when it is pressed by suffering. That's a pretty powerful image. I want to just think about that for 1 second. What was that midrash about? I don't think that midrash was a midrash trying to explain the words in the Torah. That midrash was written by somebody whose heart was broken and who was trying to make sense out of suffering in the world. Just like us. This midrash was written by Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, who looked around the world, looked around at the Jewish people, saw suffering, and tried to make sense of it, and tried to understand why, or tried to understand what now. And for him and his worldview, he found the best way to express that is by attaching his thoughts to a verse in the Torah, this week's Parsha. But it came from a place of trying to make sense of pain and hurt and brokenness. Not different than anybody now, not different than our families and friends in Israel, not different than anybody looking at the news. We're trying to make exactly the same sense of it as Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, who lived so long ago. But the human condition doesn't change so much from generation to generation. And so throughout time, Rabbi Yehoshua is reaching out to us and saying, read these words. And just like maybe it made me feel a little bit better, maybe it'll feel us a little better. I'm going to read now, continue reading from Rabbi Sachs's book. The oil was, of course, for the menorah, whose perpetual light, first in the sanctuary, then in the temple, and now that we have no temple, the more mystical light that shines from every holy place, life indeed, symbolizes the divine light that floods the universe for those who see it through the eyes of faith. To produce this light, something has to be crushed. And here lies the life-changing lesson. Suffering is bad. Judaism makes no attempt to hide this fact. The Talmud gives an account of various sages who fell ill. When asked, are your sufferings precious to you? They replied, neither they nor their reward. When they befall us or someone close to us, they can lead us to despair. Alternatively, we can respond stoically. We can practice the attribute of gevurah, strength in adversity. But there is a third possibility. We can respond as Henry responded, with compassion, kindness, and love. We can become like the olive, which, when crushed, produces the pure oil that fuels the light of holiness. Just a little bit left. I want to read this. When bad things happen to good people, our faith is challenged. That is a natural response, not a heretical one. Abraham asked, shall the judge of all the earth not do justice? And Moses asked, why have you done harm to this people? Yet in the end, the wrong question to ask is, why has this happened? We will never know. We are not God, nor should we aspire to be. The right question is, given that this has happened, What then shall I do? To this, the answer is not a thought, but a deed. It is to heal what can be healed, medically in the case of the body, psychologically in the case of the mind, spiritually in the case of the soul. Our task is to bring light to the dark places of our and other people's lives. That's what Henry did. Renata still suffered. So did he. But their spirit prevailed over their body. Crushed, they radiated light. Let no one imagine this is easy. It takes a supreme act of faith. Yet it is precisely here that we feel faith's power to change lives. Great faith can turn pain into love and holy light. We start this Parsha with a verse that sounds like it's just about a menorah in the desert. And Rabbi Sachs opens our eyes and says, no, it's not about the menorah. It's not about the desert. It's about us. It's about all of us searching for meaning when all around us things are upside down and don't make sense. And there's brokenness and hurt and suffering. And we all had that in whatever way we've had it. And it continues. And we all want to make sense. But what Rabbi Sachs is saying is the wrong question is why? Because nobody's ever going to get the answer. Nobody. So that's not the right question. What is? So the right question is, what do I do with it? And he says, turn it into light. Turn it into light. And every day when you see the posts on Facebook in Israel, you realize that there are people of extraordinary strength in Israel who are turning this into light. And it's an amazing thing. And we wonder, how can they do it? But the truth is, I lived with that. My mother and father, Zichronam Livracha, my in-laws, my father-in-law, Zichrono Livracha, my mother-in-law, she should live long and be healthy. They turned it into light too after the Holocaust. That's who we are. That's us. Each of us has this extraordinary ability inside us, the light inside us. Sometimes it takes that crushing. But Hashem is telling us through the image of the menorah that we can bring the light to the world. May Hashem give each of us the strength to do that. I want to remind you that next week, we're not going to have our Shiur. I will be in Israel attending a conference. Yitzhak Hashem, the Tuesday following. It'll be a little hard. I hope I won't be falling asleep because of jet lag. We will go back to our Parsha. So thank you all for joining. Please feel free to unmute yourselves. I'm interested to hear thoughts.
Just a little comment I like to make on the one specific thing. Make a decision. It's me.
Yeah.
Definitely, the children's education should be the most precious thing a parent can give to a child. Nothing else can come before that. Everything else could be squandered, lost, but not the Jewish education. One and only thing I could give to my child is the education. So definitely yes, above anything else. So
I really appreciate you sharing that. Thank you. But I do want to acknowledge that it's not an easy decision. It's not. And I know that there are a lot of families here, a lot. And I don't mean just Toronto, everywhere.
I know.
The cost of Jewish education is so hard. And it means a lot. And families have to give up a lot, Marika. And I'm not going to be the one to judge you should or you shouldn't. But my point was to say it's a moment to think it through. We need to understand the consequences. We have to think it through. The culture of the street will definitely push us in one direction. Quick, fast, and hard. And we need to take a deep breath and take a step back and not get swept up by this torrent of street culture. We need to stop and think, okay, so what is it that I, Jewishly, believe in? And that's all I wanted to really present.
100% right. 100% right. Yeah.
Thank you and have a safe trip.
Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. Very excited about that. Thank you.
Hope we'll get to hear about it.
I hope to have a lot of stories. I
Good.
hope God will. God will.
Yes, Rabbi. Have a good trip.
Thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate that.
Rabbi,
Yes,
at
I chose.
the very beginning of the show, you made a throw a white line. You said that Hashem commanded us to build the Mikdash, the Beit HaMikdash. There's a very interesting lady who learns with me online, Telemotion. Her name is Ruth Shane, and she's from Baltimore. She's a very learned lady, and occasionally, instead of being the student, she occasionally teaches a class. And last year she gave a class, and I looked it up with this Parsha because we have a thing, a guest teacher every Thursday night, and her whole theory was that nowhere in nowhere that Hashem command the Jews to build a Mikdash. She argued that it was entirely optional, that if the Jews would have wanted to, they could have, stayed with the Olam indefinitely. She's not, loud, radical. She's a very firm woman, and it's a very interesting feature. And I looked it up while you were talking, and the share is online, and I remember when I heard it last year, I thought that this was crazy, but when I went and you listen to the argument and things too, it's not so crazy.
So you know what, Marty? Maybe send me the link, and hopefully I'll have a chance to listen to it myself.
Okay. Well.
Thank you. Thank you very much for bringing that up.
Rabbi?
Hi, Charlie.
Hi. Another simple question, okay?
You never ask simple questions.
I always ask simple questions. In that first verse, right? It says Ner Tamid.
Yeah.
It also says Va'ata Tesaveh in the future, right? And we know that Ner Tamid refers to the menorah.
No. I mean, the burning, what?
Ner Tamid refers to the menorah.
But the menorah wasn't burning all the time.
That's my question.
It wasn't. The Ner Tamid is the burning fire is on the Mizbeach. The Ner Tamid was lit by fire that was on the Mizbeach. Because there were periods of time where the menorah was not burning. The menorah had to be lit every day. So it had to be lit every day. It couldn't have been burning continuously. You can't light something that's burning. So generally it was relit every day. They had to clean it out and prepare the wicks and put in oil and then relight it. And the fire that was used was the continuous fire was
Okay.
on the Mizbeach.
So now, from a practical point of view, when they were traveling in the desert, right? It wasn't lit, was it?
The menorah, no,
It wasn't lit. Okay,
because it was all disassembled.
right. So
Correct.
it was
So the ritual observances were suspended while they were traveling.
okay. So now Ner Tamid, the way we understand it today, right, is some kind of light like we have at shul that's always on.
You mean what we have in shul is just a symbol. There's no mitzvah about that.
I know.
Oh.
But it sort of represents this Ner
Like the
Tamid
Olympic
here.
torch.
Because
Ner
the word
Tamid in
Ner
shul,
Tamid means a perpetual candle, right?
or light. It doesn't have to necessarily be a candle. So what we have in shul is just a symbol of stuff that was in the Beit HaMikdash or the Mishkan. It's not a replica of it. So the only fire that was burning perpetually was the fire on the Mizbeach HaNechoshet, or Mizbeach Olah, or otherwise called Mizbeach Adamah. And that fire came down from Hashemayim. That was how that was lit. It came from Hashem. It came from Hashem. The Ketoret, they brought coals from that Mizbeach to put on the Mizbeach HaZahav, which was the Ketoret Mizbeach, and they lit it. And it was also from the Mizbeach Olah, or Nechoshet, or Adamah, the three names used for the same Mizbeach, that they used the fire that was used to light the menorah. So there wasn't really, like what you and I see at our shul or anybody's shul, where they have like a light in front of the Aron Kodesh. That's a minhag that has become part of synagogue sort of architecture, and it's a symbolic piece, but it's not in and of itself a mitzvah to have. Like, you can daven with a minyan without having an Ner Tamid, and you can even daven in a minyan without even having a Sefer Torah somewhere, and you can daven in a minyan we're not even being in a shul. But if you're going to be building a shul, then generally speaking, we try to build it in a manner that complies with past practice. Some of those practices are mentioned in primary and secondary sources, like facing east. The Mishnah Masechet Brachot says we try to face not east. We face Yerushalayim. So for us in the west, that's east. And if you're in the east, you'd be facing west. And if you're in the north of Israel, you'd be facing south. And if you're in the south of Israel, you're facing north. And if in Yerushalayim, you're facing the Kotel. So that's like one of the things that's there that we know about. You have an Aron Kodesh, which is open to a lot of different, design characteristics. You have a Shulchan to put the Sefer Torah on. But the Shulchan that we have is not like the Shulchan in the Mishkan or the Beit HaMikdash. They have the same name, but it doesn't look the same. So, in fact, we're told that we're not even allowed to build a menorah that resembles the menorah in the Mishkan. We don't do that in our shuls. We used to have in the old Shir Shemaim, we used to have a candelabrum, but we don't replicate what was in the Mishkan. We're not allowed to. The Mishkan is its own mikdash. It has its own sanctity, and we who don't have that sanctity don't recreate it. So the Ner Tamid that you and I think about is like a far cry from what the Torah talks about as the everlasting light, the perpetual light that was in the Mishkan or Mikdash. Everybody, thank you so much for your.
Thank you, Rabbi.
The Shiur means a lot to me, and it means a lot to me that you're joining. So thank you. Everybody have a week full of bracha and simcha and health, and God willing, when we meet in 2 weeks' time, we should share some good news, some very, very good news.
Shalom, tachzor b'shalom.
Amen. Toda rabba. Thank you for
Have
the
a safe trip.
I really appreciate it. Good night,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Be well.
Thank you.